With hatching, one is creating tone through the juxtaposition of different lines. The thickness of those lines, the proximity of those lines creates tone. It's a really good idea to think about the notion of edges. Why is one seeing an edge? Is one seeing an edge as light against a dark background or dark against a light background? Of course, if one is drawing with pen and ink, you're drawing with a permanent material that can't be erased. So it's a good idea to think about the notion of treading carefully at first. Better to start off with the tones too light and then be able to darken those than going in too dark too soon. So with that in mind, it's a really good idea to think about the notion of looking at the figure through half-closed eyes. When one looks through half-closed eyes, it's much easier to remove detail and much easier to see the light and dark contrasts. If you start off with the tone too light, then it's easy to re-find and re-establish your edges. It's very difficult to work backwards. Obviously, hatching can be quite a time-consuming process if one is drawing on a large scale. So it's often better to start off on the smaller side. Here one is finding one's way around the figure, looking at the spaces between objects. One can think about the idea of hatching using parallel lines, or one can think about the idea of lines which change direction. And in changing direction, one can also then start to think about the form that one is drawing. So does the direction of the line also indicate the change of plane on the figure? There's this idea in drawing in tone of forms beginning and ending, disappearing into space. So you don't have to start off with such a rigid outline and then fill the tones in. Again, one needs to be really mindful of the idea of the whole surrounding space around the figure. So one can kind of discover the figure in relationship to the surrounding space. So as the drawing starts to become more clearly defined, then it's easier to begin to understand just how dark certain parts of the drawing are. So one is asking oneself the question, what is the darkest value? So it's important that when you're drawing, you're not just focusing on one small area all the time, but you're flicking around, constantly re-evaluating where a tone is in relationship to another. Obviously, if one is drawing on white paper, then you're working towards the darkest values. If one is working on grey paper, then you can work either side of the tones. In other words, on grey you can go lighter and darker. Of course, if one is drawing with a fine line pen is capable of only a limited variety of marks. So if one is drawing with a dip pen, you have the ability to change the pressure on the nib, which will give you a much wider range of scale of mark. of course, if one was drawing with a dip pen, one could also experiment with different dilutions of ink. So the different dilutions of ink would yield different greys. So again, constantly squishing one's eye up, reflecting on why you see the figure. Is the figure light against the dark background or dark against the light background? Is there a counter change between one and the next? Is one using straight line hatching? Is one using contour hatching? Is the direction of the hatching changing according to the change of plane? Where does the figure begin and end? Does the figure disappear into the space? And if one did have an eraser, what lines can one take out? Now obviously if you are working with dip pen or pen and ink on paper, then the only recourse you've got is to actually cut into the drawing itself. If you're working with an eraser, then it's much more straightforward, where you can work back into your drawing, redefining edges.